Now, our old mate each way, Albo, is getting a little bit nervous. He's getting a little bit anxious because despite the fact that absolutely history would suggest that the Labor Party will win the Eden-Monaro by-election on Saturday. In fact, it would be extraordinary if they did not. But the expectations game is crazy. And Albo is throwing everything he possibly can, including the kitchen sink, to get the people of this electorate to vote for somebody to be a member of the opposition, not the government. So therefore, technically, they're voting for somebody to be a protest candidate. Whoever wins on Saturday, if they don't end up being part of the government, then they can't influence decisions. They don't have the ear of a Prime Minister or a Minister. Instead, they just become cannon fodder for Albo and Albo's leadership. But all of the issues that you would think would matter to a local community about who they hire for the next couple of years, because this isn't the member forever, this is just the member for now until the 2022 election, well, Albo's out there and he's telling all who will listen that it's all about Channel 2. It's all about ABC and the supposed cuts to an organisation that, as I show you, week in, week out, gets $1 billion a year guaranteed.
This Saturday is a chance to send a message to this government. Send a message that ABC cuts should be reversed and that funding should be restored, and they can do that by voting number 1 for Christy McBain.
Honestly, how desperate. You are not voting to send a message, you are voting to send a person to Parliament to represent your area. Presumably you would want to send one that ends up being part of the government who's then able to get things for your area in the next 2 years. But again, history will suggest that Labor will and should win this seat on Saturday. Forget all that bellwether stuff from 10 years ago. Oppositions don't lose by-elections to governments. Remember, we've got to go way back when to prove that. But one more time, about this nonsense about the ABC getting cuts. And they can run as much propaganda in a by-election week as they want. Here is the reality. The Prime Minister, dollar for dollar, is correct.
There are no cuts.
No further cuts.
There are no further cuts because there are no cuts. ABC's funding is increasing every year. The ABC would be the only media company, organisation in Australia today whose revenue, their funding, is increasing. We're trying to get the ABC out of Ultimo and into the rest of the country. So I think that's a good change. If you're working in the media industry today, if you're a journalist today, the safest place for you to be is actually at the ABC because your revenue is guaranteed in that industry. For journalists working in so many other media companies, they are doing it really tough. I think we need to keep that in perspective.
He's right, because look at this. This is from the ABC's annual reports, OK? Where do you see the cut? In 2012, they got $1 billion. In 2013, they got $1 billion. In 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 and 20 and 21 and 22, they'll get $1 billion. Only in public service land does this count as a cut. And amazingly, no one in head office is blamed for not paying their casuals properly, and they had to find $30 million in their current budget to back pay people they didn't pay properly. No one talks about that. Nobody talks about the fact that whatever jobs are currently at threat, these are going to be voluntary redundancies of just 50 people a year for the next few years. And they're voluntary positions. There have been hundreds of people who are direct employees of commercial media organisations who've lost their jobs outright this year. There are thousands who have had to burn every day they have in holidays before many of them ended up losing their jobs as well. There are people who are very famous on television and very hard-working off television who've taken pay cuts, have started 20% and go all the way close to a full pay cut. So the sooking that wants to carry on, if you want to send a message on Saturday, you send a message that you are an informed voter, that you know you are hiring somebody to do a job for the next 2 years. And here are your options. They can become part of a government or they can carp on the sidelines. But I repeat, Albo is nervous. This should be so far in the bag that he should barely be turning up in this by-election. Instead, he's trying to meet personally every voter he can because, well, the opinion polls aren't great for this bloke. In fact, less than half of the country has a positive view of Anthony Albanese's performance as the opposition leader. Yet he was there sooking today in an advertorial that he's very, very popular.
I have the support of my party, and Scott Morrison of course, was only successful because people who really wanted Julie Bishop to be Prime Minister prioritised stopping Peter Dutton. This is about the Eden-Monaro by-election. This is about Christy McBain. She's the best candidate. She's standing up for the people of Eden-Monaro.
Oh, what bullshit. It's just layer upon layer upon layer of this sort of stuff. He's all in. Because as the news poll showed this week, when he talks about his approval ratings being in positive territory, his net satisfaction rating is only 2 points. Literally 2% of people have a more positive view than a negative view of the bloke. And what about the Essential poll, who stopped printing these things until after the by-election because they show that just 45% of Labor voters think that Albo is their preferred Prime Minister. 29% say Scott Morrison is their preferred Prime Minister, and they're the Labor voters. And a quarter of people still don't know. He doesn't even have half of Australian politics. Yet still, the gallery spin is trying to pretend that all of the pressure is on Scott Morrison, that somehow it's Scott Morrison and the Liberal Party where Eden-Monaro is theirs to lose. How can this possibly be the case? I repeat, this is the last person who was able to win a seat off an opposition at a by-election. It's this mustachioed fellow from Kalgoorlie in 1920. Labor are the favourites. Every expectation is that they should win, if they win by 1 vote or 15,000 votes. If anything else happens, that is extraordinary. But the idea that somehow there'll be a potential failure for Scott Morrison in not being able to do what every Prime Minister for 100 years hasn't been able to do is deliberately trying to set traps. But are you surprised? That's the way the gallery works.